Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. And welcome to another fine Wednesday morning. Welcome to another coffee break chat. I'm your host, James Jackson, he, they pronouns, executive producer, Light Thief Productions. We got a great show for you today on a fine but cloudy 62-degree Fahrenheit day here in the city of brotherly love. We're going to be talking 76 place pilots, Philly Joy Bank, the the ongoing strike by the Longshoremen, QR codes, what are they? And some new laws that are being proposed in Philadelphia City Council. And we're going to be talking about all of that stuff and more with our special guest, Teresa Harrison, Academic Director, Center for Nonprofit Governance at Drexel University. An actual expert on things. Like, imagine me doing that. That doesn't happen often around here. But I figured I will pull Teresa on screen in a moment here, and we'll talk about that. I want to talk about QR codes really quick just to introduce the show. QR codes, you've seen them everywhere. They're the block with like lots of little dots. And there's a viral video going around that confuses the brushing scam with QR codes, and is saying that QR codes are somehow dangerous to your cell phone and your personal information and all that kind of stuff. As somebody who's spent more time than I'd like to admit in the technical field, yeah, that's not possible. QR codes are essentially text. It's like you clicked a link in an email or typed a link in your browser, and that's the most that they can be. Actually, they can display an image, they can display text, they can do a number of things, but they aren't an executable, so they can't hack your phone. The reason I harp on this is because it's really hard for people to understand scams and dangers to themselves and their information if you kind of have sort of half information and half knowledge about this stuff. QR codes are pretty cool. Look them up. There's a great video that was just done by one of the YouTubers that does science stuff all the time. And so you'll get an insight into what they are and how they work, and get an understanding on how they can't really hack your phone. But yeah, I encourage you to do that because QR codes are, quite literally the future, and we're going to be seeing them everywhere. And if you stop scanning them because you think you can get hacked, you might not be able to keep up with modern technology. So with that, I'm going to bring Teresa on screen. Good morning. Welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself, your pronouns, what it is you do.
Sure. It's nice to be here. Thanks for the invite. So, as you said, I'm Teresa Harrison. I'm a professor of economics in the LeBeau College of Business at Drexel, and I also have the pleasure of serving as the academic director for the Center of Nonprofit Governance that is also at Drexel. It's part of the Gupta Governance Institute that we have at Drexel University.
What is the Gupta Governance Institute? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so it is an institute, as the name implies. It actually started as the Center for Corporate Governance a little more than 10 years ago, and we have, as you can tell, now expanded into recognizing that governance is important in the nonprofit sector as well. The Center for Nonprofit Governance has been around since around spring of 2018, and we work to advance understanding and improving governance in both the corporate and the nonprofit space. So we do that through several mechanisms. Some is by highlighting faculty research, a little bit kind of like what we're doing today, and then also helping to create the bridge between the practitioners who are putting these things into implementation and what's happening in the research and vice versa. What are current events that practitioners, board members, sitting board members are currently seeing that we need to be responding to and providing some insight on? And what are insights that we're seeing that they can then take to the boardroom and potentially make improvements.
All right, pretend I'm really, really stupid. It's not hard. And that I don't know what the word governance really
Governance
means
means
because it's kind of it's one of those like
it's a little bit of a catch-all,
yeah.
and you're exactly right. So, you know, it is a field of study, and you hit the nail on the head that when people talk about it, they can sometimes mean different things.
Hmm.
So when I talk, so even what I say, someone might quibble with. I take a very broad view of what governance is about. It really is about the best management and oversight of organizations. Now, a lot of that work and research has been done looking at how the boards, right? So a board of directors, um, you can think about the chairman and the subcommittees on the board, a variety of components, how the board interacts with management in an organization. And notice that I'm being very broad here, also in saying organization. So this applies, as we said, to both the corporate side, the nonprofit side, private equity, family-owned organizations, right? What are the mechanisms that oversee what the upper level management are doing?
How do
And
we
so
so I mean that's like a really broad area, right? Like
it is. So I was gonna, I mean, so a lot of the work has focused on thinking about what makes boards function better. And that's very important work, right? So, and
right.
that runs the gamut even within itself. There's a wide range there. Looking at composition of the boards. What does diversity mean for performance of the board and performance of the organization, right?
What does what I'm gonna pause you there. What does diversity do?
Mm,
Is DEI an interesting thing or a vital concept, or is it like there's the thing that goes through right wing media, go woke, go broke?
yeah.
Is that true?
So the short answer, which won't be satisfying, is that we don't conclusively know. There's still it is an ongoing place of research. But let me tell you, so there's generally a positive association that more diversity, you do tend to see better performance in the organizations.
Hmm.
What we are still trying to grapple with is this, does correlation imply causation? It doesn't always, right? So you can
Right.
have two things that are associated, but them not necessarily, one isn't causing the other.
Hmm.
And so in particular, what we worry about from an academic standpoint is, are good organizations that would be good regardless, are they adopting these more diversity promoting policies? Or is it the diversity promoting policies themselves that are helping create better performance at the organizations? There is work that's on that. I'm not going to, actually, I don't have prepped particular papers that I would point to on that,
Uh-huh.
but it is an ongoing area of research where a lot of work is being done.
What what would you say the most surprising thing or interesting thing that you've found through this research that you
Mm.
can, somewhat definitively say, hey, this is actually something that
Academics often shy away from being definitive,
right, I
right?
know.
Because we can't ever prove
Scientists in general
anything,
do the
right?
same thing,
Right.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. So you know what I would like to, I'm gonna, it's gonna sound like a slight pivot, but it actually gets back to your original question,
Okay.
which is most of my more recent work. So I've done some work that specifically looks at kind of board composition, differences in, not surprisingly, you had me on as the nonprofit governance and nonprofit sector, someone who's bringing expertise in those sectors. So that's where I focus my time. And I've done some work that kind of looks at the power dynamics measured by differences in salary. That works a long time ago. And not surprisingly, it does find. So if you look at like the CEO or executive director's salary relative to like the C-suite down, like you take an average of the C-suite,
Mm-hmm.
the difference, like the larger the difference between those, generally you see lower performance for
Mm-hmm.
the nonprofit. Suggesting something about the power dynamics there.
What do you use to
But
gauge the
oh,
performance of a nonprofit?
good question. Good question. What does it mean to be a good nonprofit? I'd actually
Right.
love to hear your answer on that.
Well, I mean,
So it's the irony in that you can get yourself in a pretty vicious cycle, James, because one if you just kind of go back to why do nonprofits exist, right? When do we think we're going to see nonprofits in a sector? There are several theories, but one that is the most prominent and one that we often go to is you tend to see them in sectors that trust is an important part, and it's very hard to determine whether or not the organization is doing the right thing. So, if you date back to the 1800s, nonprofits really started coming into formation around health services, right? What does it mean to perform the right procedure? You don't know. You're not the expert doctor, right? Are they doing the right thing? And so you see that in other sectors. I know you focus a lot on kind of thinking about arts.
mhm.
That one's not so much about, we don't think about that one as being quite as much about trust. We think about that as being more, it's very costly, right? I think you heard me say professor of economics. So I think about things from an economic standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And so lots of fixed costs go into having a good art museum, for example, or a
Right.
good theater production company.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very costly. And particularly when you're in the beginning stages, you might not see a profit, right? And so this subsidization that you might be able to get from donations helps it be a viable business model, right? Um, One of the things I was going to kind of go back to in terms of the governance, though, so I started talking about the research on this shared dynamic, but as I said, I take a broader view of governance, and going back to this definition that I gave you of oversight,
Mm-hmm.
I've looked a lot more at policy and how regulatory frameworks help to frame what we see as um, you know changes in behavior or differences in performance.
Right.
Okay, so you can look at a variety of components of that. A lot of my more recent work has really started trying to think about how what regulations about what nonprofits can and can't do with their assets, how that informs decisions that they make about things like do they have a viable business model? Are they going to stay in the market? Um, Decisions about mergers or some type of joint collaboration with other nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A lot of my work at the end of the day really goes to thinking about how competitive forces um, monitor, or act as kind of, as Adam Smith would say, an invisible hand to check behavior. Okay.
It,
Um,
it it that's interesting because a lot of the conversation that I have with nonprofit arts leaders, leaders of nonprofit organizations, has to do with how do we both satisfy audiences and deliver the messages that we find important. How
right.
like I don't know if it's obvious to somebody outside of the arts that an artist wants. Most artists want to deliver a message.
That's a good
Something
point. Yeah.
is driving us to deliver whatever message, and we usually pick our message based on our own experiences and whatnot.
Right.
Um, Yet we have those pressures, those competitive pressures from outside, which is audience count, really usually. To some extent, awards processes, things like that, critique. Critique is sort of going away because it's not as popular anymore. Like you don't get
Oh,
as
really?
much. Yeah, well, at least in the live arts. I don't know about in other
Okay.
artwork areas, but
That's not an area. I've done a lot of research in hospitals in
yeah.
particular. I've done some work in fitness centers. I haven't done, so my data has arts as part of what I look at to look at kind of average trends, but I haven't done as much detailed work in the arts. So I'm
Yeah,
enjoying
yeah.
hearing about this.
So, but like what often happens is like so here in Philadelphia we have Walnut Street Theater, for example,
Mhm.
America's oldest theater according to them, one of the longest running production companies in the world. They do, whether good or bad, they do popular things. They do Shrek. They do A Christmas Carol. They do, they do the same things that is going to draw the same audience that they've always had, that appeals to that audience that they've generated. Um, there's dozens of smaller nonprofit arts companies. And just for clarity, I don't run a nonprofit any longer. I was president of a nonprofit, but
Hmm.
I'm solely in the for-profit realm now.
Okay.
But I was president of the board on Philadelphia Dramatist Center, which is a long-running nonprofit. Um, but how do we even in that nonprofit, how do we encourage our audience to change their expectations and listen to the message that we want to deliver, if it's not, if we don't want to rehash the same work that's been done over and over again, or if we want to deliver a message that might be
Yeah.
controversial to that audience. Do we want to say Black Lives Matter in more than just our mission statement? How do we produce plays and draw an audience that doesn't necessarily align with the message that we're trying to get out there?
Yeah, I mean, good question. Big question.
Yeah.
A couple of things that I guess I would say about that. One, like from a broad perspective, I do think these are questions. This is part of why we really value or pride ourselves on what we're doing in the Gupta Governance Institute, because the way you framed the question right now, I would argue, yes, nonprofits are dealing with it, and it obviously has its own nuances to it. But if you think about a corporation that right now is trying, right after George Floyd, for example, do I issue a public statement or not? Recognizing that those that are leaders in the organization from a management perspective and a board may truly believe it's the right thing to do, and so, the conversation may stop there, right? It's the right thing to do, so we're doing it no matter what. But recognizing that might mean that you may lose some customers,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? So there's absolutely that. Now, going to the nonprofit side, I think there's a different dimension or another layer to yours, James, to your question, which is so maybe not the Black Lives Matter, but more the kind of just overall messaging of aesthetically what, like, are you trying to, you can speak to these details better than I can, right? But are you trying to, elicit joy or like particular perspectives of how to view the world or things like this? I would argue that a lot of that is about public good, right?
Right.
There's something that that's like it's bigger than any one person would necessarily want to pay for, but in the collective, right, in this like community that we live in, it lives as a bigger thing.
Right.
That's what economists would call public goods, right? There's
Right.
something that has this like 1 + 1 would make 3 in this broader kind of public perspective of it.
There's a
That
lot
is
of
often, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say there's a lot of angles into that public good though, right? Because like even as a for-profit company, a lot of my time is taken up with like public goods initiatives. Like
Yep.
I run a sailboat charter company. We don't charge like to make a profit. We charge to break even on several of our ticket prices because I want people out on the water. I want people to experience the rivers of Philadelphia. I think that's an important public thing. I think everybody should do that. That's why I run the company in the first place. With this
Yeah.
company, and with this show, I tend to bring the voice of the Black community to topics of the day, to the artists that we're talking to, how to, I actually, I'm a little disillusioned with the nonprofit sector for this very reason, because it's
Say
easy
more.
for me as a for-profit person to just go, hey, I'm doing this. I don't care, like if it runs my business into the ground, great. I don't care. As a
Okay.
nonprofit, you get board members who will argue every point that you want to make, every word in a sentence of a statement that you want to release, because it might upset somebody that's a
Ah.
member or a dues paying
So,
member.
so what you've just described is a bone to pick that you have that I would call that governance,
Right.
right? So this becomes an issue where and it is very much a gray area. But good governance and organizations that are that you see good governance, there is a separation between, so the board is overseeing, but they're not managing the day to day and the minutia. When that happens, you generally are not in a situation where the board's doing what it needs to do.
Hmm.
Now, I'm obviously speaking in generalities,
Right.
right? But in general, that's not a good sign,
Hmm.
right? Now, it is that happens in a for-profit company as well. It can.
Hmm.
It's more likely to happen in a nonprofit because often, I think this model is changing a little bit, and I'm kind of an advocate for it changing a little bit more. Is often the knee-jerk reaction is that your board members should be made up of your donors.
Hmm.
Now, um, your donors are clearly they are absolutely a constituency. They care a lot about whatever this mission is, but they aren't necessarily the best people to oversee the whole the whole organization and the path and the goals and the strategies that the nonprofit is trying to move forward. They are a donor, and so you would keep them informed and whatnot, but they aren't necessarily the best from a board oversight standpoint. And so there are some models that you're starting to see where big donors, instead of sitting on the board, there's more of like a a fundraising
Hmm.
or some type of donor committee that is sits more as an advisory role, and that you're consulting them, but they aren't necessarily a true board member.
A lot of times what happens in the arts with the boards in the arts is, the organizations are so cash strapped that the board
Yes.
is not only donors but is volunteer, which then
Yes.
obviously
That was the second thing I was about to get to,
yeah,
which is very different.
and
Yeah.
it obviously incurs all the problems that you have when you talk about like things like internship and barriers to entry into organizations, because the people on the board then by necessity have to have the excess time and money to participate in the board. But go on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're that was exactly where I was going to hit. I don't think you're interrupting at all. Is that the model for how so let's just set aside the donor for a second. I've kind of talked about what I think it might be some issues there. Um, so actually let me say real quick. I mean, any board should be looking at kind of something like a skills matrix, right? You want So diversity can mean lots of things. We clear, diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, right? But also diversity of thought in
Hmm.
terms of getting different people who know different things on your board.
Right.
And that's part of what I meant, that donors aren't often the best equipped from that standpoint, right? They know what they like about a board, but I mean about the nonprofit. But the second part of that is this volunteer component, that by definition like restricted from your situation. If you decided you wanted to pay your board members in a for-profit company to sit on the board, you wanted to give them some type of remuneration,
Mm-hmm.
or you wanted to distribute profits, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
In a nonprofit, by definition, if you are classified as a 501c3 organization, and the 501c3, I mean, I think people have probably heard that terminology, but just as background, in case you don't know, that literally comes from the IRS tax code.
Yes.
That is the section in the code that says that you're a public charity. And as part of that, you are doing something, like we said, that's kind of has this broader benefit to society, but you're also, no profits, no excess, no positive net income is being distributed to any stakeholders in the company, right? Ownership rights, basically, it's the organization that owns it. There is no individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so from that standpoint, a board member is always going to be a volunteer. And yes, that comes, so they need to be passionate, but it can then mean that it is a second, it comes second in getting things done because it's seen as this volunteer status. I think it's an area that we really need to think hard. I'm not in any way suggesting like rewriting the tax code or rewriting what the restrictions are, but I think we need to think very carefully about what are the right ways to incentivize board members to really be engaged and not just be checking off a box.
Well, and not only, um, is it a problem for board engagement, but it's a problem for diversity on your board. How you can't have low income voices. You can't have
Mm,
voices of new parents. You can't have voices of people who are, constantly working. And having been the president of an arts organization, I wanted people on the board that were constantly involved in the industry that we're a nonprofit
yeah.
in. How do
And
I
that's the right way to move. I
right?
agree with that. I will tell you that some of what we've heard when we do roundtables, and we have a feature series called Directors Dialogue that we run on both the nonprofit and the corporate side. And we have people that we think are showing good governance come and talk. And one of the examples that was given, I won't name the organization or the person, but they talked about the fact of recognizing kind of the board as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that you often see on a board is, in order to be, you got to pay to play. In order to be on the board, you need to give this certain amount. Well, one of the strategies is to say, okay, well, I just need that amount on average. So, person X, so I was never in any way suggesting that no donor shouldn't be on the board. You
Right,
may
right.
very well have some big contributors, right? And say, person X, I'm really wanting to build a more diverse board where we can have some seats for our constituency, but I still need to raise this average, contribution per person. Can you give for 3 seats,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you view it more from that standpoint that everybody at the table is definitely contributing, but what they're contributing is different.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that the having those that you represent on the board is a key. There is definitely movement on that and a recognition, but exactly as you said, every organization is also, they have to deal with the reality of how do we make the budget. Yeah.
So, speaking of budget, how do arts organization make budgets? Let's talk 76 Place. I want to talk pilots. How do
Yes.
pilots interface with your nonprofit governance here?
So I'm going to take it outside of the governance per se
Mm-hmm.
realm, but I actually have some work. So, reading about this was really interesting. Pilots are not, so just as a little bit of background for your audience, in case, they don't know, they're not unheard of. They're actually a very common tool Many hospitals, healthcare providers in the nonprofit sector, and educational institutions have probably for the last 15, maybe even a little bit more years been paying pilots. So I
I
guess
just I just want
we just
to
need to say pilots are payments in lieu of
yeah,
taxes,
I
right?
wanted to spell it out, payments in lieu of taxes,
Yep,
and I wanted
yep.
to bring up that a lot of leftist, progressive-leaning folks have been pushing on Drexel and Penn to pay pilots, um, and I'm intrigued as to why the pilots from Drexel and Penn, in what way they would be different than pilots from, say, 76 Place.
I mean, so I'm not either, I don't have all the details of how they would differ. In fact, I tried to look for the community benefit agreement, and I don't think the agreement per se has been made publicly available
No, no,
for the
yeah.
Sixers agreement. Um,
Just the
but
highlights
it,
have, but yeah.
yeah, so as the name says, it's pilots, excuse me, payment in lieu of taxes, right? And what they are specifically meaning about the taxes is property taxes. So in this agreement, the Sixers would not be paying property taxes, but would be paying these pilots. I think they specified 50 million. Um,
I forget the
I
number. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not
And
it's
so it's not insignificant.
right.
There are definitely questions about and both sides are taking maybe a little bit of a bet here. Okay. So the city is betting, and this goes back to the public good component. So again, I don't know all the details. I'm definitely, just like as a complete caveat and, stating I've not been involved in any of these details, haven't talked to anyone specifically about it. But my guess is, the city is making a bet that um, having the arena there. Oh,
No,
can I
I
paste
was
the
talking to
link? Is
Meg.
that to
Sorry,
me? Oh,
that's to
okay.
Meg.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
my associate producer Meg for the audience is in our Zoom, and she's also pasted the link to the WHOI article about
Right.
the pilots and the community benefits agreement in our
I see it now.
comments, and so I was
Yeah.
just wondering if she could paste it here. So I just dropped it in the chat.
Yeah. So
This
what I was
yeah,
going to
go ahead.
say is, it's not clear that and you could take either side of this argument, and I think there could be validity for both. Critics are going to say that the pilots are much lower than what the Sixers would pay in terms of property taxes, and so they're getting off easy,
Right, right.
right? The flip side of it, and this is also there's uncertainty here, we don't really know, but the bet is that that the arena being downtown is going to generate additional revenues and additional benefit to that area. And I know there's controversy about that, particularly around the surrounding community. So I'm definitely not trying to trivialize or overlook that in any way. But there's this bet that from an economic standpoint, it's going to have, again, economist term, we talk about spillovers,
Right.
right? So there's the direct benefit of the Sixers arena being there. You can measure the things about the benefit of the construction workers working, the individuals who are working for any particular events, right? Increased employment for
The
this for
vendors in
those,
the
right,
space, the
right,
nearby
right.
vendors,
So
etc.
so
Yeah.
there's all that, but then there's this indirect. And the indirect, again, I didn't see the whole proposal, but I'm supposing things like increased, additional restaurants and vitality, additional entertainment where you go after the events or after a Sixers game, right?
Right.
Um, Potential. I'm assuming that when the Sixers aren't there, very much like the other venues, they'll bring concerts and
Well,
key players and all of those types of
the
things.
one big thing that they're talking about is bringing a WNBA team to Philadelphia, which is Nice. And they are on opposite schedules, so the arena would be in use more than had previously been projected. However, yeah, so a lot of the reports that I've read are kind of break even at best as far as like
Yeah.
what the ancillary benefits would be versus what's already there, and is that going to affect the community that's already there? Obviously it is. What are the effects? Well, people either have to invest money in their businesses or they'll go out of business, or their homes will now be overpriced because of proximity to a popular location. That
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that
There's
goes
a lot of,
into it.
of, of costs and benefits. Yes, this is why you often see economists or consulting firms that hire economists getting involved in this, because there's
Right.
definitely
Right.
that kind of cost benefit analysis. And it's complicated, both because there are many layers, like we talked about, and also because you're looking into a little bit of a crystal ball,
Right.
right? There is
Yeah,
there is
nobody knows
clearly un,
actually what's going to
there's
happen.
clearly some uncertainty,
Right.
right? Um,
How
so
do these how would a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes say? So one thing I want to talk about, like how pilots work. Pilots, as far as I understand, can be directed by the organization or company
correct.
paying them.
Yeah, and that is one of the broadest. So let me just say, as we're starting, this is an area, I mean, I think we've already established I'm a researcher, right? So I think about what are the things that we don't know.
Right.
And I think the verdict's still out on overall, like if you look kind of at, cities that have adopted pilots, has this ultimately been good for the city, bad? I don't think we have a very conclusive answer there. There
Okay.
had in
Fair.
fact, I just emailed a colleague this morning and said, um, hey, maybe this is something we should think about, or you should think about a little bit more, because the last time I looked at this like 5, 6 years ago, and I'll explain a little bit of that research, although it's not about the Sixers.
No,
Um,
that's okay.
and
Not specifically. I'm interested in how
yeah,
these all play
so let
together.
me give kind of the elevator speech. So
Yeah.
the speech for that one. So this was not exactly about pilots, but it was about the exemption for property taxes. And this goes specifically to fitness centers. So I'm sure most of your constituency and you are, quite aware of the YMCA's. They are taking a larger role over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years in the fitness center ecosystem, right? I don't know about you. I mean, I don't currently, but I have had a membership at the YMCA,
My
and
wife keeps
they have,
threatening.
and they faced lawsuits, actually quite a number over some quite intense, and I don't know what where it is now, but when I was doing the current research, it had been like a 5 year plus court battle for whether or not the YMCA was going to have to pay property taxes. During one of those kind of levels of decisions through the courts, it was determined that the Y was going to not only have to pay property taxes on the expansion, so they expanded to make the gym bigger, the fitness facility part bigger, that they were going to have to pay taxes on that and back taxes on property that already existed. It was a big deal. And so colleague and myself, we looked at this very carefully, because what the for-profit gyms often come in and say this is unfair competition. I'm competing with the nonprofit for gym memberships, and I have to pay property taxes and you don't. And so we looked at this very, very carefully using a nationally representative sample. And the things that we were trying to understand is basically, if you, as best as we can, we actually were using data, but you kind of run what we call counterfactual experiments, where it's if you put a nonprofit in an area, based on the data, do you expect to see one less for profit? So that would mean that there's some kind of displacement.
Got it.
Economists call it crowd out.
Right.
Okay. Punchline was we did not see that. So yes, you could see nonprofits come in, and they were more likely. So it was clear that the property tax exemption, I mean, this is kind of, I think it makes sense to anyone who's thought about a revenue model, right? If your costs go down, particularly your fixed costs go down, because that's what property taxes are, right? They're taxes that you don't really get any, you're not paying per membership. It's literally, are you there? So what that does is tend to influence, do I decide to enter a market or do I stay out? And so if you run a hypothetical of now YMCAs have to pay the property taxes, we saw that on average about 20, you'd see a decrease in YMCAs by about 26%, but basically no change in the for-profit presence. Okay. So again, this means there didn't seem to be any displacement. Now, where it gets really interesting is, so, the property taxes were having an effect, but it doesn't seem to be affecting really the for-profit decision. And then the other part is we know that YMCAs, in addition to most of them provide some kind of youth services, right? They have gyms that they let teenagers play basketball in for, free or a very reduced rate. They have swimming pools. They have after school care, right? A variety of things. And we estimated that if you made them pay the property taxes, you'd see this reduction in the nonprofits. And you would also therefore see about 20% less youth services in the area. Now, maybe a government, agency comes in and fills that in. We can't really speak to that based on what we were seeing.
Right.
So my point in that was maybe more than an elevator pitch, but my point in mentioning that is it does get very complicated, right? So the city and Sherelle Parker, Mayor Parker, is making a gamble that it's going to be enough, that it's worth. I mean, so you probably can do the calculation, and it's probably the case. I don't really know, but I'm guessing the pilots are probably less than what they would pay on the existing property infrastructure. There's not enough details as I can see to really know.
Right.
But if the Sixers we go off revealed preference, right? If the Sixers are willing to do it, then it probably is beneficial, is better for them. They think it's going to be better for them than the property taxes. So why does the city do it? They do it because they're betting that it's going to have that it's like the youth services. It's going to have enough additional benefit, and it's going to mean that 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, probably not 5. I mean, that multiplier would be.
So I often cite a multiplier in the arts. So there's a great organization, a great research organization in Philadelphia, the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance. They do research.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, they do research every year on the economic impact of the arts in Philadelphia. Consistently, year after year, they show that there's about a 3,000% ROI on any investment that the city does into the arts. They get about an equal dollar back in tax revenue because there's a 3,000% ROI for. They spend $1, there's $300 spent in the economy based on that dollar that the city itself spends. I've had a lot of success in arguing for funding for the arts with members of political people that keep that in mind, which oddly puts me in the position of often lobbying Republicans because Republicans seem to understand this better than Democrats.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't quite understand how that works. Like, I'll tell this to most Democratic members of City Council or wherever I'm talking, and they'll be like, "That's interesting. I'll have to look that up." And you tell it to a Republican, Councilmember David Ho, very famously. The arts council member before he left City Council to run for mayor, because he understood this concept and he knew this repeatable model before he even entered council. And so he was very supportive of the arts, very easy to work with and talk to about the economic benefits of the arts. What I don't know, like if that's your experience or not, but that's just been mine. I don't. How does
This is
someone?
a lot of what economists try to do, right? Is to help. I mean, it's not the only thing, but we spend a lot of time thinking about both the direct and the indirect benefits and also the indirect costs,
Right.
right? So, if an interested user, watcher, or even goes and uh, looks up Google Scholar and puts unintended consequences in, and that's all you put, you'll see a laundry list of really good articles. There's lots of good ones that are about kind of unintended consequences from policies that are potentially meant to do X, but they maybe do X, and they also either increase Y, which no one saw coming, or they decrease, Y. And so again, that indirect that you're really talking about is what we would call positive spillovers. So maybe you want to also multiplier is a good terminology for it as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a key piece to continue to advocate for.
Yeah, I harp on it a little much. I suppose. I think I bring it up pretty much anytime I talk to anybody about
I don't
funding
know,
for
you
the arts.
should, because again, it is often the case that we don't get past looking at the direct benefits and costs, and those indirect can be very substantial. I mean, think about the example that I just gave. Well, you gave it too, right?
Right.
Okay, so I don't know the statistics, but based on what you said, right, 3,000% ROI.
Right.
I'm saying you lose, on average, not every single community would lose it, but on average, you're going to lose 20% of youth services,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So if you asked a city council person, do you want the property taxes or do you want kids in the area to actually have a place to go for after school care,
Right.
right? Are you willing to provide that? I mean, these are important questions and
So
not one that necessarily is looked at.
So back to how pilots work, they're directed. Obviously, 76ers Place is going to direct their pilots towards things that they as an organization think are valuable
And as
and
I
or
understand, I think the amount they need to pay per year is specified.
right,
Sometimes pilots can be, they said it's voluntary. And then that can mean it varies year to year based on the revenue or net income or something like
right,
that.
right.
But please go ahead. I just
But
wanted to raise
so
that.
they're obviously going to direct their funds to be spent in a way that resonates with them and or is politically expedient for them because they can use that direction to also indirectly support things that people that they need support from want supported. So youth centers.
Perhaps.
You can say, okay, 76 Place, as a city council member, you can say, okay, 76 Place, I want more youth centers in my neighborhood. I want the community centers to be completely rebuilt by 2035. By the time 76 Place is done, I want the community centers in my neighborhood that I represent to be completely rebuilt. I want your pilots to go to rebuilding towards my community centers, and 76 Place can say, okay, I'll give you that money in exchange for your vote. How does that? I mean, it starts sounding like a little bit.
I think I know where you're headed. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're headed down
Quid
quid
pro
pro
quo,
quo,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I don't know if that's actually how it's specified. I don't know what kind of latitude and what the process is.
Right.
Like I said, I believe I saw the number, although I don't have it up. I took highlights and the highlights are gone from the article that I was looking at. But I think it said something like $50 million, maybe. I don't know if how much they've specified already what it needs to be used for. I'll tell you the other good example, again, for those that are interested in this is something that actually we do have some information that might be helpful in terms of thinking about this because when the Affordable Care Act was enacted in 2010. As your subscribers may be aware, part of what happened with that. So let's back up before the Affordable Care Act. Many uninsured, they still would find themselves needing health care. And so the unintended consequence of the uninsured is that they would often wait until they needed to go to the emergency room. The cost would be higher. And then, at the end of the day, somebody foots that bill if they can't pay the hospital bill, right? And so one of the things the Affordable Care Act did, in addition to creating insurance, when it did that, it removed part of what nonprofits, so this goes back to the pilots. It removed part of what nonprofits would argue they were providing to the community.
Mm-hmm.
They would talk about the fact that they tended to serve, and they had what's called uncompensated care. So they were more likely, the data is really murky here, but they would argue that they provided a lot of care to those who could not otherwise afford it. Okay. So now if everybody's insured, then a big part of that benefit of not having to pay these property taxes goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the mandates in the Affordable Care Act, and it's now part of the tax return that nonprofit hospitals have to do, is they have to list all and provide an estimate of the amount of all the community benefits they provide in their local area. And if it's deemed that that's not enough, then there could be potential consequences. Now, I'm not aware of what those are at this point, but a particular municipality could in fact look at that and then use that as a point of arguing for either more pilots, or potentially, like I said, it has happened in the court of law where someone takes a nonprofit to court and says, you have to pay your property taxes.
Mm-hmm,
and as I
mm-hmm.
gave in the example of the YMCA, there have been cases, it's very, very rare, but there have been cases where the nonprofit has lost those cases. So I don't know, and maybe you know a little bit more. Is it specified exactly what that is, or is this part? I think that's part of your point, is that because it's not specified, it can be a bit negotiated and maybe change over time.
Yes,
that you have concern over that.
Yeah, my interest here in how pilots work, and it was piqued with people calling for Drexel and Penn to pay pilots during the George Floyd protests, and then because I found out that people paying pilots can essentially direct their funds. Well, then you have to look back on the organization and what are the motivations of the organization paying that pilot? Why would they, other than just even a direct cash savings? It sounds like a win-win for an organization to pay a pilot. Not only do I get to direct save a little money on my taxes, I get to say where my money goes. I
think again, this is why there needs to be, in my opinion, more research into this area, because the directed component, to the best of my knowledge, is not something. So because these agreements tend to vary so much, they vary across cities quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also, I think exactly to your point, vary. The city might have kind of a baseline of what they're doing, but then they vary it depending on the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been one of the components that has been criticized, that it's not as clear what's happening with that as if even if it was reduced property taxes, is that the same?
And
I don't think it's a question that we really know the answer to.
Philadelphia has a pretty wild history of not really doing well with alternate taxation or taxes going where they're supposed to. So We could
Well,
spend
maybe that's another show.
yeah, it's another show. We could spend all day on the soda tax and the cigarette
Yeah.
tax and everything else. But I wanted to talk about something that you brought up real quick. We have like 3 minutes left in the show, so I want to talk about Philly Joy Bank. Philly Joy Bank is an organization that provides $1,000 a month in cash assistance to pregnant residents with low incomes. They have to be they're folks in their second and third trimester, and they're over 18.
I don't know about the is it it's a nonprofit?
Yes, so it's a nonprofit, and the reason why I'm bringing it up in specific to your conversation is, so you were talking about, the entry of nonprofits into markets where, they might be competing with a direct government service or a for-profit. This is in a way competing with both in a weird way, because it's a literal guaranteed income program. So like the program is essentially to provide a livable income.
So it's literally a cash outlay,
right?
Okay, so it's not $1,000 for healthcare or
Nope.
to buy. I see.
Yeah. So it's competing not only with local businesses for employment, which is a weird way to think about it, but it's just how I would see somebody thinking about it, as far as a competitive nature. But it's also competing with any city services that would do the same, city or state services that would do a similar thing. It's competing with unemployment insurance. It's competing with welfare insurances, welfare systems. How do nonprofits play in this arena with good governance and not cause negative knock-on effects that they can't predict? I start an organization that pays $1,000 to underemployed mothers, in their second and third trimesters, yet that lowers the demand or the apparent demand for the social system to provide that same care.
My guess, yeah. I mean, as I think my questions make clear, I don't really know a lot of details about it. And so like I said before, caveats of not only do I not know that, but the interplay between them. My guess is, and I'm assuming that they would argue that it is meant to be complementary, right? That if you look at things like food stamps, what we used to call food stamps, right? Any kind of social assistance that they would get, that it's not for a pregnant to-be mom. It's really not enough to keep you above the poverty line. And so I think they would see this as an additional to try to really prop you up. And I do think there's some evidence. This isn't an area that I've done a lot of detailed work. But when you think about it, there is a lot of work that's shown that government programs that really help early on, the amount of payback, kind of like what you were talking about with the ROI. If you don't just look at that particular year, but you think like 18 years into the future, because you're literally setting the stage for this new person that's going to come into the world, the benefits far outweigh the government cost.
Yeah, those benefits are also so nebulous, and not that they're not real, but just how do you even track the benefit of having a well-fed child in their newborn years?
There are ways that economists are definitely in on starting to do that. Not that we pick up everything, but the data very much support these type of social assistance programs. And so I would imagine that Joy Bank would definitely be calling on potentially some of those types of
benefits
estimates, right, to be able to say, hey, we're providing even more of a leg up.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you say it, and I actually need to think about it. I don't think about it as being competition. I think about it as being complementary, because I don't think it denies you the service of the other. Now, I understand what you're saying, that on the margin, an individual might decide to then not go get unemployment insurance or the food stamps. I think it's not enough. Like if we were talking $10,000 a year.
Right. Well, we're
Now,
talking
now,
we're
now
talking
I can.
$12,000 a year. It's $1,000
Well,
a
oh,
month.
right, because it's a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I think that's enough. Um, yeah, it's
I mean,
these are
cost benefit
important questions.
people really do cost benefit analysis in their own
Yeah,
heads.
absolutely.
Is it easier for me to get this $1,000 a month? And then,
But if I could get both, that's
right.
the additional question,
But
right?
how much time and money do I have to invest in getting both? Right? Like,
Right.
I've got this $1,000 a month benefit.
Does Joy Bank assist, no pun intended, with I mean, there is a lot of bureaucracy potentially for getting the additional benefits. Do
Sure.
they assist with that part as well? Because that then goes more to this kind of complementary component.
Yeah, it sounds like they do an overall, consultation assistance kind of thing, but their primary benefit is the $1,000 cash.
Hmm.
And it's focused on the neighborhoods with the three neighborhoods with the lowest birth weight in Philadelphia, which, speaks to they're looking to affect this knock-on benefit, long term. And also, being focused in those neighborhoods, you could argue, well, if the birth weight is always low there already, the social services aren't filling the need. But then you get into the backwards argument of, okay, well, if they aren't filling the need, there's going to be more demand. You're going to have
Yep.
people rioting or
Are you sure
protesting.
you're not trained with some economics background?
No, I'm just somebody who
No,
spends a
these
lot of
are
money.
these are exactly the types of questions that our field hopes to really provide some because exactly. I mean, I think the key takeaway from our conversation today is don't just look at the direct, right? Like
Right.
you got to think about, and so to the extent that this gets them in the door and then helps them understand how to apply for additional programs, whether Joy Bank is helping. It's a question. It's the analog to what I was asking about the gyms, right?
Yeah.
The argument could potentially go both ways. There are valid reasons. Let's get into the data and really see what happens.
Yeah, we're a little bit over on time. If you have to go, it's okay. But I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to talk about something real quick, which is safe injection sites and how this relates to safe injection sites.
Now I feel like I'm getting really out of my depth.
No, it's okay.
I think what I will say on that, I don't want to get myself in trouble, because again, like we said, economists, economists, academics are. I mean,
you never say
very
anything for
hesitant.
certain. Yeah.
Well, and it's particularly an area I don't say anything for certain about something that I know really well. So
Right.
now I'm in an area that I really don't know.
Here's
What I
here's
will
what-
say.
Wait, let me frame this so that you have a way to respond. Let me just frame it. So, what it made me think of, like what made me think of it, is that idea of providing a stepping stone to seeking the services that are otherwise available to everyone, but
Yes.
not necessarily easily available to the people that could use them the most. So like there's other ways we could talk about this. Just safe injection sites popped in my head because that's often the argument that I get into with people who are of a conservative bent, is that what it actually comes down to is that we're all looking to do the same thing, which is help people that are in addiction get out of addiction and become part of the social fabric again. But we see it differently as to how best to do that. is, like, is there research into how the nonprofit things like safe injection sites, like drug paraphernalia programs, like needle exchange,
Right.
etc., reach into the economy and either help or hurt it in this way?
Yeah. I don't know the specific research on this, but there the argue so you argued it was like a positive spillover component, right? That
Right.
you're allowing them kind of entry back into programs and systems that can kind of help them figure it out. There's also the argument that it decreases, again, what economists would call negative externalities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is, as I think most of us are well aware, if there isn't monitoring or some kind of ability, there's a lot of shared needles, right? And then we're increasing disease proliferation, right? Of a variety of forms. That has negative consequences to people in ways that they're not even thinking about. You don't even think you're going to be impacted. Oh, they're just like to someone who's maybe more self-interested, just leave them over there. Well, that's the exact point of a negative externality. It can absolutely influence you. So that's a negative spillover. Um, and uh, I think part of what the question becomes is you hit this too, and I don't know what the current research is saying about it, is are the people the setting up these sites are the ones that you really really want to reach, the ones that are the most apt to be able to kind of get out of the system, the ones that less, that really, I don't know quite how I want to put it, because you want to be able to help everyone. But if you're thinking about kind of highest impact,
The
are they coming into the
Yeah.
site, right? Is setting up these sites actually making it so that they are more inclined, or is it individuals coming to the site that already would have gotten help some other way,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Because
again,
that's
back
the
to
big
this
argument. Yeah.
correlation versus
Yeah.
causation. And so this is where, sometimes you see experiments that are run in this
Mm-hmm.
area to try
Mm-hmm.
to help understand. Um, I don't know the most recent, I actually don't know very much of that research at all. I'm really kind of more at the high level of this. There's pros and there's cons. And yeah, I agree with you that at the end of the day, we really do want to be helping them. I think this is why um, not the nonprofit sector plays such an important role, particularly in the US economy,
Right.
because we can play, I know you had some skepticism and I understand some of it, but I think it's a key component of helping bring some of what the government may or may not be providing to either, like we said, complement and support, and might be able to be more agile, and more trustworthy potentially. And these are questions
It's also an
that people,
interestingly less regulated, less fraught way to bring government money to specific causes and tasks.
yeah.
Because
And I want to give a shout out here. This is a place where public health um, scientists and also public health economists play a key role, is to kind of think about that cost benefit.
yeah,
I know that a big part of that is probably going on right now in the Philadelphia area.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Last thing we didn't cover, if you got a minute, the
I do probably need to go in like a minute.
all right,
So,
I'll just introduce this, and if you have any thoughts on it, feel free. In Philadelphia, we've elected progressive, actually somewhat real progressive candidates into the city council, and they've been introducing things that are ostensibly trying to solidify the social safety net, the social construct of Philadelphia. Two bills that have been introduced and worked on a lot recently: the eviction record sealing bill, This is a bill to essentially, when you get evicted from a rental unit, there wouldn't be a public record about it anymore that people could then use to deny you housing. And the anti-rent price fixing bill, which is a long-winded way of saying, we're going to make sure that landlords don't collude to set prices higher than an area can afford, which I've always been harping on essentially South Street is on the east side of South Street is owned by about four people, and so they've often been accused of price fixing and actually somewhat admitted to price fixing several times.
They have a monopoly there, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
So, how do these like these kinds of things that improve the social safety net from a governmental standpoint affect your research? Like, when you suddenly have the landscape change around the social contract that you're working on, nonprofit governance, how what is a good organization, the social landscape changes, and then what does it redefine what you find as a good organization, or does it eliminate things that that you would have considered as a well-functioning organization then?
I mean, this is what economists are looking at all the time. If anybody's interested, I will say, so you can go and so it's called the ASSA's, American Social Science Alliance. It's our big organization. We've actually been written up in the New York Times about the fact that, like, we all get together in January and, whatever economist jokes you want to put in there, you can. And you will see a litany of sessions and papers that are set, or that, you might be tired of me saying, well, I don't really know about that area. And it's precisely because when we go in depth, like, you get to know particular types of policies, right? So there are economists that really focus a lot on thinking about policies that are related to that are crime related type policies, right? Uh, what decreases recidivism for prisoners, and these things that clearly have big public good possibilities. The two that you're bringing up, I'm thinking, I mean, a public economist, a public finance economist could look at it from how much it's costing, right? There's these issues about, housing development. Does it change the house? I mean, there are so many myriad of components. And so people will go and say, hey, this policy was implemented, what changed? And we'll try to do a very detailed analysis. Is oftentimes we look for policies that are set up in quote unquote the right way, that we can really get at this kind of causation question. But this interplay between government, community, and organizational behavior is a key place. I like to think that that's a lot of how I think about the world, right? So nonprofits, where do they fit into that part of the ecosystem? When are they kind of benefiting these positive outcomes that we want as a society? Yeah, I mean both of those. So what hit my mind, is there's clearly, like, for the price fixing one, I mean, it just doesn't rise to the level of being something that, like, the Department of Justice would look at. There's the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice is entirely not entirely, but a lot of their cases are about blocking mergers. They have price fixing cases, but it's like they're taking on things that rise to a certain size level in terms of the organizations. It sounds like that's part. I don't know what the second one. I start thinking about, how are you going to enforce it? You're going to need people to measure it. How do you actually see how do you determine what price fixing is relative to the market is just booming in that area? right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need a detailed analysis to look at it.
Yeah.
So I know that's not a satisfactory
No,
answer, but it's
I,
exactly, what you hope is that there's this interplay. It doesn't always happen exactly the way you want, but you hope that we're informing, saying what good policies are, the way we start, like what good governance looks like. Policies then hopefully take some of that into account. I mean, we're not naive enough to think they're going to take all of our recommendations, but it incorporates some of that, right? So when you think about the eviction record, there are clearly cases where there are those that having an eviction record definitely, I mean, you're just doubling down on them,
mm-hmm.
right? And they can't get out of the hole. There are probably, so there's going to be a whole range, right? And there are going to be potentially those that if the eviction record is sealed, they might have another eviction,
Right.
right? But you want to look at on average, is this good or bad?
And even if somebody has another eviction, is it good or bad? Is it good or bad that they had another eviction? In the overall, some might argue, well, at least they were housed during that eviction process.
And James, that goes exactly. So if they were housed and that then saved a government agency X number of dollars in terms of, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are definitely the types of things that you try to measure.
Right. Well, thank you.
Or we've covered the gamut.
Everything has to do with everything on this show. I tend. This is how my brain works. I tend to interrelate everything, and one thought leads to another.
I'd love to see you in one of my economics classes. Maybe come over to Drexel. I teach in the MBA program and also our DBA program. So come on over.
I would love to join you. I don't know that I have the money for it. But yeah, I'll talk about my my access to education and validity of degrees as a judgment of whether or not somebody should be qualified for a position in another show.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you for joining me. Any last thoughts?
Thank you for having me. We've had a great set of discussions. I think you've now given me like 3 or 4 things that I'm going to go look up on my own after we get off.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to one up of me and
I hope
out
it
for the
was
show.
Insightful for your audience.
It was. I really appreciate you joining us. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you to my audience. I really appreciate you joining us here every week as you do. We didn't get to the last couple of things, and I will cover them more in detail later. But it's always great to have these conversations and talk about how things are all interrelated. I don't know that we can really delve into every nuance of every topic. But at least hopefully these conversations spark something in your imagination, bring some new element of thought to what you're thinking about. And I can only do that by bringing you the thoughts that I have, and from my perspective, and hopefully bring the perspective of the community that I live in to these conversations. We didn't really cover the Longshoremen strike. It's interesting. Look into it. There's some interesting pros and cons, and it creates some strange bedfellows. We didn't really get into the quote that I used. We better have a plan. But we better have a plan. This is the era of enshittification, for lack of a better word. Hopefully you have a plan that will help you create a better world for the next generation, create a better world for yourself, etc. I'm gonna go ahead and put on the title card and put on the music. But I hope you have a great rest of your week. If you like what you see, please hit the like button, the subscribe button. wherever you're watching us. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitch, and we're on Live Push. If there were more outlets out there, I'd probably be on those too. But those are the easy to do ones. So tune in anywhere you like. Live on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Tune in after the show if you can't make it by 10 a.m. We have a post show, as soon as the show goes away from being live, it's an instant replay. So feel free to watch it anytime. And really, if you like what you see, subscribe and support the show by joining us on Patreon. I'm gonna outro us, and I hope to see you next week.